Welcome to the People Leader Accelerator Podcast. I'm Executive Coach Jess Yuen, joined by my co-host, the co-founder and managing partner of People Leader Accelerator, Andrew Bartlow. On this show, we dive deep with business and HR leaders to uncover what really works when it comes to building high-performing organizations, navigating leadership challenges, and making better management decisions. Whether you're the first people leader at a startup or a seasoned executive at a company with scale, you'll find practical insights you can apply right away. For show notes and free bonus resources, visit peopleleaderaccelerator.com/podcast. And if you're looking for hands-on support from developing your leaders to creating a high-performance culture to hiring the right people, visit us at peopleleaderaccelerator.com. We'd love to help. Let's get into today's episode. Well, Kate, thank you so much for joining us today. I was really looking forward to this conversation, partially because you've written this incredible book, Powerfully Likable, which has been getting all sorts of accolades and press coverage for what is, I think, a topic that a lot of HR leaders grapple with, which is how do I do this job in a way where should I be likable and or powerful? And how do I think about that dichotomy? The awesome reason why I'm so excited is it's a bit of a mini reunion because we worked together years ago at Khan Academy. And I was like, oh, Kate is like the fancy Google communications PR person who's coming in to help us out. And you and I became fast friends and spent a good amount of time together while we were there. I would love if maybe you could share with our audience a bit about your background and your arc and what brings you here to be talking about Powerfully Likable today.
Oh, thank you so much, Jess. And thank you, Andrew, for having me. This is a true delight. It's a funny question, isn't it? What brings me to things? Because what brings any of us anywhere, right? But it's a really lovely mingling of a lot of threads of my career that I realized in hindsight have become very relevant and connected, but maybe at the time didn't feel as much. One of the threads that led me to this book in particular is that I worked in communications for a long time. So I worked inside communications in companies like big tech and on the startup side, where I would notice and work with executives on how to present, how to create narratives and pull material together and essentially coach them, although I wouldn't have thought of it as coaching at the time. And the other thread that comes into this is that I am a debate nerd.
And Kate's being modest because I was telling Andrew actually before this, I was like, she won the world championship in
right.
not just
which is kind of the nerd Olympics, right? Or one of the nerd Olympics. I'm sure there are others. And so I've always cared a ton about how you speak and how you persuade. And particularly in my experience, the tech companies I worked at and debate were largely male organizations. And they were, particularly in the sense of debate, very adversarial male organizations. And so there were always a lot of questions for myself, like, hang on, I can't just ape the men around me because I was getting feedback like, that's too much, you're too aggressive, that's too strong. But I can't over-feminize either because I would be perceived as weak or beatable or all these other things. So I suppose I have walked this tightrope myself for many years. And now I work with people to help them walk the tightrope. And so that's what was very exciting to me about writing the book was like, I get to bring all of those stories and learnings and honestly some of my own failures in a book that hopefully will help others who may well find themselves negotiating similar tightropes.
You're a bit of a unique guest for us in that you're not coming from the HR world. You come from this communications, PR world, and you're now working as an executive communications coach. For anybody who's not worked with an exec comms coach before, can you share more about the types of things that you work on and, who comes to you and when?
Yes, it's a great question. It is a weird niche, but if you think about communication as a foundational thing that underlies all of our work, I work with people who are in the C-suite in all different areas, all the way down to, I would say, like emerging leaders at companies where I work with like cohorts of early managers or mid-level managers, etc. And really what you're looking to do is, what are the patterns that I have learned that are serving me and working for me in how I communicate? I do a lot of work helping folks isolate those. But then what are the patterns or the things that I might be doing that are underselling my contribution or my value? And oftentimes those are unconscious or they are in service of trying to make us appear less threatening, more likable, all sorts of different things that come at those intersections where we might feel essentially fear in a workplace. And so my clients range across verticals, across stages, and across companies, but they are usually folks who are at some sort of an inflection point in that they might have had a promotion and think, I have to speak in front of this all hands and it's 400 people and I've only ever spoken in front of 200 or 20. How do I make that jump? Or maybe they are people who are like, I need to be more persuasive with my stakeholders, right? I'm not getting the cut through and I now need to talk to a board or to investors or to press or to all sorts of other constituencies. I want to be my best when I'm doing that and I don't know that I am there yet.
That makes sense. That's a need. Boy, that's a need. Right?
Yeah.
Kate, thank you again for being with us. I'd love to open up the cover a bit on the book. Congratulations on publishing the book. Could you share a bit more with our audience that may not have all yet had the chance to read Powerfully Likable? Could you share a little bit more about some of the central ideas?
Yeah, thank you. So the central idea for me was it feels like to many of us in leadership that there are two doors that we can choose to walk through. And one of those doors is the powerful one, right? I can be high authority, low friends. Think Miranda Priestley in The Devil Wears Prada. Very officious, terse, succinct. Or the other door is the likable one. I can have lots of friends, low authority, and porous boundaries. Sure, no worries if not. Absolutely, I can do it. I'll be at the office till late. And it feels like these are our two options. And a lot of the people I work with feel like, yeah, one, that does feel how it feels. And two, I don't like either of those doors. They don't actually speak to me or help me get what I need. And so my idea of the book was, what if we got rid of that binary or that dichotomy, as you say, Jess, and actually said there's tons of ways to show up on that spectrum in between those two poles. And actually, we can bring together things that might feel on the face of it dissonant or different, like power and likability, and actually work out many more generative places to show up and communicate from. So I have people say, well, actually, I'm like ambitiously communal. I'm super ambitious. I go really hard, but I want to bring my team with me. And that's the place from which I communicate. Or I have so many other things where people are able to give language or vocabulary to this type of feeling. And in doing that, realize, oh my gosh, that sort of unlocks something for me to communicate as myself. So the book is very much not like, do these 5 things, but rather, where are you on the map? And what are the things that might benefit you or behoove you to adapt or experiment or try such that you're feeling more comfortable in the space from which you communicate and actually doing a job of showing up in a way that feels like it's doing yourself justice, which is, I think, what we're all trying to do.
Yeah. Well, thinking of our cohort, our listeners who are, typically mid to senior level HR professionals, that's a particularly challenging spot for us to be in the org,
Right.
Operating both in service to the employee base and the broader organization, as well as trying to help the organization meet its goals.
Yes.
And
Yes.
you can often feel caught between the business and the people. And you can
Yes.
often feel caught between being of service and being a tough leader, tough-minded leader. There may be some analogies here with powerful and likable. Yes. And so I hear this a lot in our development program, People Leader Accelerator, of how do I navigate this situation? How should I show up? It sounds like your book is the answer.
I'm not sure it's the answer, but it could be an answer.
Well, help us understand, if possible, speaking to a mid to senior level HR professional, are there a few golden nuggets or tips from the book that we could use to navigate our complex power dynamic in the office?
When I speak to people, it's usually that they know, because they're consummate professionals, they actually know what they want their answer to be. They know what the decision should be. It's that the delivery of that decision is plagued with the rewriting of the email 10 times or the rehearsing of it, thinking, oh, how do I not look this, but I don't want to look that. So it's not the decision I'm ever coaching anyone on, which thank goodness, because I'm not an HR professional. It's the delivery of how do I get that across in a way that retains my relational currency with that constituency or person. It's not like I'm in and out and I never have to see them again. I'm seeing them tomorrow and the next day and the next day. And presumably I have asks to make of them in the future as well. So the thing I would say is when you're thinking about the delivery of a decision, it's like if you know what the decision is, so that's the first part and that's your remit. The second part becomes, how can I do it in a way either that retains my authority but keeps maybe my warmth? And what I think the mistake people try to do here is that they go for deference to be likable. So we've unconsciously coupled these two. So that we say things like, this might be wrong, but, or I'm so sorry, or I'm not the expert, but, or you've probably already thought of this. If I make myself really tiny and really small, they will like me. And that is not always the case for likability, but it certainly does not code for authority. Right? Everything I just said to you doesn't make me sound like I know what I'm talking about. It sort of does the opposite. So I often say, if you find yourself going for deference in those interactions, think about adding warmth instead. Think about, Andrew, it's so good to see you. I'm super excited to jump into this. This is what I need to cover with you today, A, B, and C. Thanks again for your help. Suddenly it's a real shift into like, I'm still friendly and approachable and all the things maybe that I want to be in service of as HR, but I'm also not going to origami myself up into this, tiny little thing to do that with you. That's one of the most common patterns I notice with folks is that in service of seeking likability, they hit deference instead.
That makes a lot of sense in terms of like, how do you control the dial there? The nuance of how you show up. We have a week in our development program for HR leaders about influence and power.
Right.
And so we have some readings with Robert Cialdini, and we have a little bit of a 5-minute MBA that our friend Brad Harris walks people through. And one of the things that we talk about are these 11 sources of power that Cialdini and others have their own frameworks as well, right? And being likable is one of them.
Yeah.
One of 11. And if you overemphasize any one of those, you are giving away your influence, giving away your power. And that, frankly, is something that I tend to see the most of in HR professionals. We want to be of service. It's in large part why we entered the work.
Right.
We want to help others. And so being service-minded is wonderful. But if you do too much of that at the expense of other things, you're missing the maximum influence and impact that you can have in an org.
And I would also add to that, I think you're spot on, but I would add to that likability is so subjective. If you think about the people around you in your office and you think who's likable, is it that they always bend the knee to what you need? Maybe. But it might also be that they deliver a project on time, that they're reliable. It might be that they're helpful, that they give you a good idea. It might be that they're creative. So I think it's a mistake also, not that you were, but I think folks often think to be likable, I must sort of bow down, or I must be smaller or lesser or not sort of in my power, as it were. And actually, there's so many ways we can think about likability that I don't think anyone I've ever thought likable was someone who was made themselves tiny around me. I think it was I admired something about them or I liked being in their company. So I think that's important for folks to remember as well.
Kate, maybe one more follow-up question from me. I know Jess is chomping to ask more questions. Likability in today's environment with new technology, with AI, with disappearing text messages, with video, short form, also the political environment, and let's say sensitivities that are happening between groups that just can't agree or can't see things the same way. How is likability being shaped and changed in this context?
Oh, that's such a deep question. My read on likability in that context is actually openness to hear. You don't have to agree, but I think the opposite of that is closed-mindedness, where it's just nope, this is the truth and that's what I'm sticking to, and I'll be in my vacuum, without any dialogue. I think it has to be on the side of dialogue, which is to say, even if I am a staunch opponent of yours, I would hope that I was able to sit down and actually hear what you had to say and see if there was any validity to it or applicability of it to my work. I mean, that's also my debate bias showing, because I'm a firm believer in there's always two sides. And sometimes those sides, I think, particularly in, politically sensitive contexts, are much more heated or much more harder to see the opposition because, we're in media environments that reinforce our own preferences, etc. So it becomes further and further away. But I do think openness is probably the key there to thinking about likability, and maybe unlikability is like just a refusal to engage or even countenance, an opposite point.
Hey, hang tight. Here's something you'll want to know if you're leading people at a high growth company. Level up as an HR leader and join a lifetime community with People Leader Accelerator. Apply today. Now, back to the show. Actually, I feel like I have to follow up on that. I have a real life situation. I was at a business dinner not very long ago where the person sitting next to me was sharing, after a couple glasses of wine, a bunch of conspiracy theories related to political items. And I won't say which side or whatever. And I chose to shrink, to get really focused on eating my mashed potatoes.
Yeah.
And not ask any follow-up questions and not engage or dispute. But I'm hearing from you that being unlikable, dislikable is refusing to engage. Like, I looked for safety, and so I just didn't say anything. I was, oh my goodness, I don't want to engage in this. But it sounds like that may be the wrong thing to do. Withdrawal.
Well, I think judgment would tell you that you picked the right context and maybe how much worth that was to you, right? There's also a world in which, like, that's exhausting. You don't need this person. It's a dinner party and those mashed potatoes look pretty good. And so maybe that saving your own energy in that moment is like the best sort of longer term sustainable position. If that person was your key stakeholder and what you are actually discussing is the project you're working on or, tasked with delivering, then it's probably harder to ignore or shrink back, or maybe more detrimental to the work outcome if you did. So I certainly think there's judgment in, like, if it's just a social thing, to be able to withdraw is, if that saves your own mental energy as well, then that's not a bad thing.
Bless you for making me feel better about not engaging in that.
I think all the introverts listening to this right now, including myself, are like, ooh, Kate just gave me permission.
I give you full permission.
I have a bit of a non-HR question. I was personally really curious about the title of the book and how you landed on it. And even just the difference between what would it represent to say that you are powerfully likable versus having likable power. I would love to hear maybe a little bit more about the naming of it. And, Andrew mentioned there's 11 sources of power according to this, other research, and why this particular piece of it?
I think it was the one that spoke to me the most because I was someone, especially at the earlier stages of my career, I would always get, in 360 feedback, I would always get, oh, Kate is always there with her lovely smile, or smile figured in like so many of my reports. And I would always feel like it was such a backhanded compliment. Like, I did all of this work and the smile is the thing. For some period, I think I felt kind of unseen or dismissed or infantilized or all manner of things by that commentary. And what I came to realize is that the fact that I would show up and be sort of a, yes, sure, absolutely, I'll get it done, was actually currency. That likability made people fight for me to be on their teams. It made for them to fight to promote me. It made them want me to come on that trip or get that opportunity. And by the way, that's pretty naturally who I am. So it wasn't a performative thing. That's just kind of me. I realized that there was currency in that. And it made me kind of reclaim that narrative for myself a little bit, which was like, oh, I'm not just a smile. Clearly there is a track record behind it and there's expertise and value. But actually the coupling of those two things, which I did feel as power, right? I did feel control over my domain or my ability to contribute to a team, coupled with a sense of like, I'm very approachable or people would find me easy to come and have a difficult conversation with, was really kind of key to how I grew my career. Those two things were so interesting to me because they seemed to sit at such different ends that it was a very personal choice to choose those two words and in the order that they are, because that's kind of how I identified it. And I hoped it would allow others in the book to feel like, what are my two things? Or what are the poles that I bring together? You mentioned introversion or extroversion. There's so many values, and whether it's Enneagrams or Myers-Briggs, I don't care how you quantify it, that we can pull together and I think make a much better or generative space from which to speak, which is really what my work is. How do I get you to speak comfortably and as yourself and represent yourself in the best way? That's really the goal of any of like my one-on-one coaching clients or cohorts. And so I guess I hoped by using that of my journey, it would somewhat speak to others, and maybe it wasn't so as uncommon as it felt when I was going through it. Maybe it would be more resonant with folks.
Yeah, I love that. And the ambitiously collaborative is sticking in my mind too, of just how these juxtaposed words can really open up a different understanding of who am I as a leader and what do I want to stand for and how do I want to go about it. I mean, that resonates a lot, especially because I've gotten feedback that I'm too smiley. I even say if you go to my website and listen to my like couple minute intro, I recognize like I have gotten feedback that I'm too smiley.
Yes.
Literally in writing, you'll notice I use a lot of happy faces as well as in person. And I'm curious that at the executive level, something like a smile, when is it useful? And when do we kind of want to tuck it away?
I'm hyper aware of a lot of women having a history of being told to smile more. And so I don't want to be the person saying, you should add this to your list. And if that's not who you are, just do it again. I think smiles are strategic, right? And if you think of them as a tool in your communications chest of tools that you can use, they can be really helpful because we go around, and I talk about this in the book, with this like fleshy oval that is our face. And it gives a lot of information to other people. Like, how weird is that, right? And so when someone has a really blank affect or, is a stern look on their face, we can take all sorts of readings from that they may or may not have wanted to give us. Why I think a smile can be useful to you strategically, a couple of areas. One, if you're going up to speak, so if you're on a stage or you're in front of a boardroom, a smile physically, practically, like moves your facial muscles and helps ease that actual act of speaking. So if you're nervous, and doing a smile then around at the table can make actually you feel practically easier to speak. It can also code for confidence. She's smiling. She must be ready to get up there and start talking. She's not like terrified or stricken. Okay, so there's certain times like that it can be useful. The other one, there's a really interesting science or neuroscience behind the way that we do tend to mirror someone else's expression. So I talk about this a little bit in the book. I used to be such a serious debater. I was very, very like focused and concentrating that I would be stony faced because I was thinking in my head like I'm playing 4-dimensional chess. There's a lot going on. And my face was not showing any smile because it was like hyper serious. Now, that's fine in the sense that like that was my process, but I was met with an audience of 20 or 200 stony-faced people, which if you've ever spoken in front of a lot of people, that's a terrible feeling because you're like, what's wrong? Why do they hate me so much? And they're like, why is she being so serious? And you never get resolve or rapport. So if you can get up and you can smile with folks, you'll actually see them loosen up. You'll see shoulders come down. You'll see arms uncross. And that's a really nice feeling that sort of feeds back into the energy of your own talk. So obviously there's thousands of examples I could give you, but those are two in terms of like maybe relevant to your listeners. If you're getting up to speak, don't be afraid of a smile if that doesn't feel terribly foreign to you. And even if you hate smiling, just know that it has strategic value.
I love that. And the power of when we can use these smiles. Likability in general is a bit of a tricky element that we can struggle with, especially in the HR world. I'm curious, what are some of the most powerful shifts that you've seen folks be able to leverage when they are communicating? So a smile is one example of that. What are some other things that come to mind or that you've seen with your clients that can help? It might be sort of like either easy, quicker tips or just longer term things that we can sort of keep in mind.
One of them that comes to mind is it's a little bit related to the sort of diminishing oneself before we've actually had a chance to speak. But I talk a lot in the book about something I call imposing syndrome, which is the idea that it's often in making an ask that we fear being like an imposition on someone. So we like, oh, I don't want to take your time, or I promise it won't take long, or I'm going to send you just the top page. You don't have to read the rest. There's this anxiety around making an ask because it feels like making an ask is going to put the other person out terribly, or potentially make you unlikable. So it often happens when we're acutely aware of our likability. And I want to say that most of us, if it is an ask, it is important. It's probably something you need, right? I need to get those notes from you, Jess, because I got to send them to Andrew this afternoon. It's not a no worries if not, please don't hate me. It's a pretty legitimate business ask. And I think when you're in the business of having to make asks of different people, whether it's time, resources, headcount, you name it, feeling a little bit more free about this is just a business ask. This is not my family's, name on the line. This is a pretty transactional thing. And I can relinquish some of that emotional enmeshment that I think a lot of us feel when like, oh, please don't hate me and I'm going to cover it in all this. You get those emails sometimes. You have to pass what the actual ask is because there are so many disclaimers. I know you're so busy. I'm sorry to even be asking. I'm sure you don't have time for this. You're thinking, just tell me what you need and I'll tell you if I can do it. So I think that would be one that I would say is a really simple one to start thinking about now. Do I have anxiety about making asks? And if so, can I put that down and just give myself a break over it? And again, I can still ask with warmth. I don't have to be like, Jess, I need the notes, Kate. And we're probably not going to send that email to each other as two smiley people. But it could be something
might put a
like
smiley face after the ask and before it.
Or we might say something like, hey, Jess, thanks so much for your time earlier. Would I be able to grab those notes from you? Thanks again, Kate. Doesn't have to be like, I don't want to bring shame on my family and my village, right? And I think that's a really thoughtful, helpful way to think about asks.
And you're answering a question that was sitting in my head of how much to caveat. Can we just make a direct ask? Is that okay? When is that all right? And one other thing actually coming to mind, because we were talking to somebody based in Asia the other day, is there a cultural element to it of like how much warmth you would put around it? And even from a company to company culture standpoint too, with that shift?
Yeah, I'm working with a Swedish pharmaceutical company at the moment, and I do a lot of work in APAC as well. And so I think, yes, there are tons and tons of differences. The best way I think to do it is to do what I think in the West we would think of as just polite is probably the right way to think about it, right? So terse can come off very terse. But again, certain Asian or European cultures could seem very terse to us. So a little bit of grace goes a long way when you're dealing cross-culturally. I had a call recently, and I won't out the nationality of the person, but she said, Kate, you had a haircut. And I said, oh, yeah. And she said, I do not like it. And I was like really reminded of, I don't think she meant me any malice, but it was quite a shock to hear, right? And so I think those sorts of things can take us by surprise, but I've chosen to believe that I had a great haircut and it was a cultural moment.
I've always loved your hair, by the way. I wish my hair did what your hair does.
I'm thinking of these caveats and rationales and excuses often, right? Minimizing. I'm sorry to interrupt. This won't take long. I'm sorry I have to leave early. I've got to blah, blah, blah. I don't know, like actually speaking from my personal perspective, it kind of annoys me more when someone comes in and absorbs more of our time, giving information we didn't need to hear. We're trying to move on.
Yes.
Like, don't interrupt us more to tell us about your dog sitter coming. Like, just go ahead and go take care of it, please.
I think that love languages may be the same, Andrew. I think there's that movement of, bring your whole self to work, which is that I will tell you about my dog sitter or whatever it is. And I certainly don't have an issue with like context, but it's the caveat is the important difference, which is if I'm a friend and I say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I got to run, my kid's sick and I got to run to the school. That's totally fine as a reason I might have to drop off a meeting, right? Important context as to otherwise that's weird. Kate left, 10 minutes early. But the caveating is like, I would then spend a long time being like, I'm so sorry, this never happens. I can't believe it. I'll make it up. And you're right, that often does both take a lot longer. But also everyone else is usually like, I was with you when you said you had to leave, like leave or, do the thing. So the other thing I think I hear a lot from particularly women who are looking to go to that next level is they will do that type of caveating. And then they will say in the next breath, I keep being told I don't have executive presence, or I need to work on my executive presence, or I didn't get the promotion because of my executive presence. Now, executive presence is a much hated phrase from me and a very amorphous concept. But I think what they mean in those situations is an executive would handle it. They would not caveat it. They would say, I'm sorry, I have to leave 10 minutes early. Jess is going to catch me up. Thanks so much for your time. And they're out. And it's like, can you show with warmth, with friendliness, with whatever attributes you identify with, a sense of, I've got it handled. I'm doing my business and I'm moving on. I think that's a helpful lens, especially if you're feeling awkwardness in those moments, which we often do, right? It's hard to not do the expected thing in the moment if that's the situation.
Showing more confidence and ownership versus being so apologetic. Jess actually prepped me for this, and so I'm hoping that you might be willing to share. Are there any scripts or sample language that you could recommend to our audience and our listeners that would help them, or us, I'm part of this too, please, help us to own our own accomplishments instead of downplaying them or defending ideas without being defensive? Are there words or phrases that would be helpful for us to show up in a more confident way?
Yes, there are. And I give a lot of scripts in the book, not so much that I think everyone should pick them up verbatim, but really like, hey, here's an example of how that could sound. And then, that might be helpful. So a really useful one is, you touched on the idea of, defending without being defensive, which I think a lot of people really find difficult, and it is difficult. One of the things I like to say Jess and I are in a meeting together and I staunchly disagree that she's got the right idea and I think mine should be the one we follow, right? Instead of being like, these are all the reasons you're wrong, or these are all the reasons I'm right, which is often what our brain wants to do, or at least maybe that's telling you too much, but that's what my brain wants to do. I would say something like, hey, Jess, I'm very interested how you got to this position. Can you tell me more about how you see that in service of the goal? And then you would explain what the goal was, right? Because where I'm bumping on it is, I'm looking at this from this perspective. Am I missing something? Tell me how you've come to that. And what it does is it brings us together and it reminds us both we are in service of the same goal. And it invites you in to say, well, actually, Kate, the thing I think your plan has missed is, or this is really important to my, product managers or my HR leaders or whomever I'm representing because, and you may actually get to a more productive place together because I may have realized, oh, wow, what I thought was my super duper plan has not taken into account this really important piece of data. Or I can say to you, I see where you're coming from. My plan takes that into account in this way. Can I tell you a little bit about it? And so we're sort of getting into that place of information sharing and information gathering rather than like you're wrong and I'm right and we're sort of at odds. Because oftentimes we're in those situations, we have to defend or we want to hold the line. And oftentimes it's, say it's with someone who's more junior to us. They're like, we really want to go this way. And we've really decided, no, it actually has to be that way. Inviting them in, you can hear what they're saying and actually say, I hear you. We don't have the capacity to build that for this quarter. That's something I'm going to take on mind for the future. But actually for this quarter, we really need to go ahead with this as the plan. So you can defend the line, you can hold the plan in place, but you've at least allowed for that person to be heard, which is oftentimes really just what all of us want to be, is heard and validated. Like, that was a good idea. It's not going to work this time. So that's, I think, an example of those types of scripts or language.
The mechanism I'm hearing that might be a theme here is responding to some type of conflict or difference with curiosity.
Right.
Rather than an explanation or descending into here's why or here's what I meant by blah, blah, blah. That's a statement. It sounds like coming back with help me understand XYZ could be a pretty effective approach.
Yeah, I think it's curiosity and calm. So I talk a lot about being a calm communicator in the book, which is, I think, one of the more powerful ways to communicate and to hold your own ground and space. But curious and calm is exactly a lovely balance, because if I'm unruffled, if I'm just like, yeah, tell me more about that, I'd love to know, I'm actually doing some interesting work of co-regulating the other person in the conversation. So if they are coming in really hot, and I'm like, yeah, absolutely, I'd love to sit and talk with you about that, it kind of defangs them. They can't stay that angry and agitated. I mean, they can try, but it's harder. I talk a lot about co-regulating emotion in terms of like being able to take the heat out of something such that you're really just getting down to, again, the delivery of that information. So I often come back to this phrase, or I find myself saying a lot, good communicators impart information, but gifted communicators really change the room that they're in. so they can bring it down. They can get someone across the line. They can persuade. They're doing a lot of other work outside of the words. And this isn't to say like, oh no, I'm never going to learn these Jedi mind tricks. It's very possible, but it all starts with, as the beginning of the book does, with really like, let's drop a pin on the map where you are. And then we can go from there and build on where are the areas that you want to sort of fortify and strengthen yourself in. And where are the areas that you're actually already doing beautifully in? And how can you bring that to bear, so that it's feeling like you in those interactions and not some like performative work robot.
Yeah, I would love to double click into that calm bit, because I was actually talking to a client who has a coworker who is in a more powerful position and is physically larger, taller,
Right.
demographically in a higher status class. And I notice that they're struggling. Their amygdala is triggered. They're going into, fight, flight, or freeze, and freeze is their version of how they're reacting. And I would love to understand better, like for somebody in a situation like that, they want to show up confident. There's a lot of imposter syndrome. They're trying to show that they have this leadership value to bring to the table, and they're just aren't able to find it. What are some of the tips or tricks you would give to that individual around how to get to calm and find that confidence?
That is not uncommon. I'm sorry she's going through that. I see a lot of that. I would add a fourth F to your flight or freeze, which is the fawn, right? Is the fourth one, which we make ourselves small. So a lot of folks in a communicative sense often fall into that one. And I think it's maybe the least noticeable in some ways because the fight and flight and freeze are so visible. But the fawn, to me, once I learned that framework, I was like, oh, that's the thing that's can often be really
that's
holding
actually
us
what
back.
my client is leaning on, because the default's like, yep. And it's just kind of agreeing through the conversation as opposed to like, oh my gosh, like I disagree. And I've suddenly got myself to a different place than I was hoping to.
And again, this is like the animals who fawn, like literally play dead. Like, don't look at me, nothing to see, keep moving. And so, I mean, that's often a threat to safety. And you're talking about a physicality difference as well. It's both a rational response and a very unhelpful response. So the rational part is your body is sensing a danger and it is adequately equipping you with a response that it thinks might help. And that's what our bodies are literally have done since whenever. Something I talk about in the book is we forget that we're animals. We have this very cerebral existence where we're really neck up, and it may be hands for typing. And we forget that these very animal responses are happening, but they're coming instead of like, a physical threat on the savannah, they're coming from like an email from Greg. And it's alarming and strange. So it's once really rational, but really, really unhelpful. So what I often try to lead people to is, okay, let's understand why and when that response occurs. So isolating those areas, it happens with this person or these types of instances. Is it the physicality? Is it the power imbalance? Like, what is it? Let's really dig into those. Let's understand what your physical reactions are. Sweaty palms, dry mouth, whatever the physicality. I have someone who says, I feel like I've got a cage around my ribs. I feel constricted. So let's get into the physicality of that. And then the third step is actually what I'm going to be my own regulation exercises for helping myself to get through that. So we all know that when our body is uncomfortable, we communicate the least. So if we are cold or hungry or tired or all these animal type of things, we're not going to do as good a job. We know that on like a visceral level, but we forget that in the day-to-day. So what are the comforts that you can give yourself in those moments? Is it like a blazer that makes her feel really great? Is it having had a meal beforehand so she's not ravenous as well as something else, right? So like really going back to basics. But then what are the exercises of regulation? Is it breathing, yoga, running, lifting weights, singing? What are the things she can incorporate that is actually going to help her? That'd be like the first level prescription. But I have a lot of exercises in the book and like actually how to have a dialogue with that voice and make a good decision that you are choosing to go into those interactions anyway and choosing to show up anyway. I mean, that's really the challenge of work in a nutshell, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it's such a good reminder too around how important those fundamentals and basics are. A lot of folks who are working in tech, working in startups, are working crazy hours. And the things that often get put to the wayside are eating healthy, sleeping enough, hydrating, getting exercise. And one of the newsletters that I wrote some months ago was like, why do smart people like not pee for 8 hours? And it was just being at this point of like, we just think like, oh, I'll just send one more email or do one more thing. And we
Oh
put
my
off
gosh.
these basics that it seems like the short-term trade-off is worth it, but the long-term is really can be detrimental to our ability to think at our best and approach these situations at our best.
Yes, you're so right. I also don't think it has to be like those crazy optimized, creatine gummies and ice baths and all of that. It's literally drink the jug of water next to you. Get some sleep. It's important.
Kate, I'm still integrating some of the last nuggets of advice that you shared about how to deal with this power imbalance and these fight, flight, freeze, fawn interactions. And what I think I'm taking away from it, and help me make sure that I've got this, is that you can acknowledge it. You can observe that this is happening from my animal instincts and body reactions. But it's still up to us to use the cerebellum to make a choice, to
Right.
own our own behavior. And it might require conscious thought to still engage and still interact, even when all this stuff is going on. I wish there was this trick to say, oh, if I just say these 3 magic words, that person like gets smaller or gets out of my face or is nicer.
Right.
But it sounds like it's just like, this is happening to me. I'm going to say something calm and rational and probably curious in response. Is that directionally correct?
I mean, if you can, I think there's also instances. I mean, I'm certainly moving on the assumption that she is physically safe in this example. So obviously, if that was in danger, my advice would be different. But I think there'd be part of it, which is like, say you go into that meeting and you've done all of the calm regulating work you can, and you've made those decisions, and he is angry and threatening and irrational. And I don't know that that's the case, but if that were the case, I would say, you know what? I don't think we're going to get a lot done in this meeting. I'm going to say, there seems like there's a lot of heat going to it on your side. And I'm going to make some time for us to meet tomorrow, this afternoon, next week, where we can come back to this with a clearer mind and be much more rational about it. And what you're saying is essentially that behavior is not going to be acceptable to me. And I'm actually physically removing myself from it until you can, I had a funny interaction recently, which was not so much professional as I was dealing with a contractor at my parents' house. And I had to meet the contractor at the front door, let him in. It was a very, very big man, and I am a fairly petite woman. And I also had my 2 kids in tow, which was unusual, but that was the day. And I was 5 minutes late, which I apologized for immediately. I'm sorry I couldn't get a park. Here I am. Immediately started yelling at me for being late. And it was like, this was pretty unusual and very out of the ordinary, I would say, for me, but also like a pretty extreme response to 5 minutes late, again, for which I had apologized. And I hadn't even opened the keys to get into the house yet. And I just let him go and I let him talk. My kids were hiding behind me. And I said to him, are you going to stop doing that when I open the door?
Ooh.
Right? And I said, will you be polite to me if I let you inside? And it took him back a little. He did not like it, but he stopped. And so I think in those sorts of situations, because now I'm in a house with, and it was a really difficult situation. And that's probably the worst I've experienced in terms of someone like literally sort of leering over me and being very physically threatening. But I think sometimes we forget, if that person is unable to regulate themselves or has difficulty in doing it, you can forget that your behavior is actually causing that effect on others. So you could say, for example, I'm happy to have this conversation when you are not going to shout. I will not have a conversation when you are shouting at me. That is my flaw. So when you're ready, I'm ready. Because while I think there's tons of stuff we can do for ourselves to help us go into it, if the other person is irrational, it's insane to then think, oh, it was on me.
It's sometimes about them. It's actually sometimes about them.
So there's ownership and then there's wisdom at distinguishing where that line stops and where you begin. And I think sometimes drawing attention to that line can be useful.
This is so useful, really, overall. We had another guest on our show. The episode's already been released, Melanie Naranjo, who talks about some of the power imbalances and demographic differences that are fairly common in our work in HR. Very often, the HR leader is younger, earlier in their career, far more likely to be female or in a demographically underrepresented group. And will be part of an executive team that is, largely older, whiter, and more male. And there are lots of power imbalances. And HR is often not fully occupying their seat at the table, and so might feel less than. So all sorts of confidence things are rolling around in there. And so your work, Kate, I'm just really excited to share with our audience, and I'm going to crack into the book in more detail after this conversation. I'm excited to do so.
Oh, thanks so much, Andrew. I really hope it's useful. And I will say, coming from a PR background, I think PR and HR share a lot of similarities, not only in the R, but in the often more junior, often having to tell senior people things they don't want to hear, and often feeling like they're a servant of two masters. And I think maybe a fourth is often perceived as like administrative or almost like support rather than like an integral function that makes the whole machine run. And so I really both empathize with those people who might be feeling those things, but also feel really strongly that there are ways to feel more comfortable in that role. And actually, you were brought into that role because they need you. And so when you can kind of keep that at the forefront of your mind, it makes it a little bit easier, hopefully, to share that expertise.
Thank you, Kate, so much. I feel like you've just been dropping so many pearls of wisdom throughout this conversation. It's time for our accelerator round, our last few minutes where we just asked a few quick questions of you. The first is a learning question of where do you like to learn? Our audience of HR leaders is always looking for excellent resources. Your book, Powerfully Likable by Kate Mason, is an excellent place. But that one aside, what are two other resources that you would recommend that you love, whether it's around communication or something else, but that is a place that you've felt like, hey, this is something I recommend a lot, or I myself have learned a lot from?
Oh, that's a great question. One of them is Matt Abraham's podcast, Think Fast, Talk Smart. He's out of Stanford, and he also has a book, which is excellent. I listen to a lot of learning, and it's a great way to get some very, very interesting perspectives from very smart people if communication is something that you really care about. So that would be one place. The rest of my podcasts are kind of niche interests, but I'm really enjoying the Rest is History podcast, which has absolutely nothing to do with my professional life, but is so beautiful to hear very learned people just nerd out on things that I've been curious about in history and get a chance to just enjoy for an hour. So that is a really fun one.
I'm excited to check that one out. I love Matt Abraham's work, but yeah, the rest is history. I just was reading a book about the history of chocolate, and there was so much fascinating stuff in there. It was kind of my sweets fix after Halloween, where I could no longer take more actual sweets. And I was like, I'll take it in a different.
If I could read a book of chocolate and not eat it at the same time.
It was very satisfying. I will say that. The next question is, in one sentence, what advice would you share with someone about how to accelerate a successful career in today's environment?
I mean, I wonder if it's something like be curious, be calm, and strive for excellence.
I love that. They're great reminders and tie back to exactly what we talked about. And last, but certainly not least, if folks would like to follow up with you after hearing your incredible wisdom in this podcast, where can they connect with you? Where can they find you?
Oh, yes. So I'm on LinkedIn. It's probably my internet home these days. My website is katemason.co. So you can drop me a note there as well. I'm sometimes on Instagram, Dr. Kate Mason, and I have a newsletter. I have a Substack, katemasonsubstack.com. So all of those places, I'm delighted to chat.
Wonderful. And we'll include those in the show notes.
Again, just really appreciate you so much. Thank goodness you and Jess knew each other already and had this prior work experience. I feel like I've learned a lot from this conversation. And again, I'm excited for our audience to get the same opportunity.
Oh, thanks so much for both of you for having me. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Jess. And I'm thrilled to be here.
Thank you. And thank you for joining from the other side of the world. We didn't mention it, but Kate is sitting in Australia right now. So we extra appreciate your contributions today.
My total pleasure.
Thanks for joining us on today's episode of People Leader Accelerator Podcast, where we talk with business and HR leaders about what makes great leadership and great work. We hope you walked away with at least one game-changing insight for you and your team. You can find show notes and free bonus resources at peopleleaderaccelerator.com/podcast. If today's conversation sparked something for you, hit subscribe, leave a quick review, and share this episode with that one colleague who really needs to hear it. You know who I'm talking about. And if you're currently navigating the tricky waters of hiring top talent, developing leaders who actually lead, or building a culture that fuels growth, let's talk. You can find us at peopleleaderaccelerator.com. We're here to help you and your team not just survive, but truly thrive. I'm Jess Yuen, and on behalf of my co-host, Andrew Bartlow, thanks for investing your valuable time with us. Be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a single episode. Until next time, keep learning and keep leading.